was in the time of Jesus, and it is the shape of an egg. Here we are, it's oval. We are here at the northern part of the city. The north wall is behind you, it's 200 yards away, and it is in exactly the same position as it was in the time of Jesus. Other walls have been moved around. This one has stayed in exactly the same place, and I'll explain the reason why in a few minutes. So, first of all, we're outside the walls. Second of all, when the Romans crucified people, as a matter of policy, they always did it alongside highways. The purpose of crucifixion was not necessarily or simply to put the person to death. The idea was to intimidate. They're the army of occupation. They want the maximum number of people to see it, and they want it to be prolonged, smelly, and painful. So they did it alongside highways to ensure that from dawn to dusk, people would be walking past and they would see what was happening. Now here, at the northern part of the city, we've got the intersection of two major highways. The first is the north-south route from Jerusalem to Damascus. The second is the east-west route from the Jordan Valley to the Mediterranean Sea. This location was perfect for what they wanted. During the day, people would be going in 4 different directions, just here. Point number 3. The Romans came here in 63 BC. Before they came here, this area was being used for execution, not by crucifixion, but by stoning. It was the method of execution that the Jewish people used in ancient times. The reason that they came here was not because there were plenty of stones to be had, but because of the cliff. So the person that had been convicted was taken to the top of the cliff and literally thrown off. The body landed at the bottom of the cliff, and down at the bottom were a group of men with rocks in their hands, and they would systematically crush the skull of the person that was being put to death. That was stoning. It wasn't me standing here and throwing stones at you whilst you tried to dodge them. It was bloody, it was up close and personal, but it was merciful in the fact that it was over so quickly, whereas crucifixion deliberately took days, 2 to 3 days before the person expired. Now, using this site for death by stoning meant that this site was defiled and unclean to a Jewish conscience. So if the Romans used the same site for their executions, then there would be no protest from the Jewish residents of the city. It was just a continuity of use. When they came, where do you throw your rubbish? Oh, that's the Valley of Hinnom down to the south. Where do you execute people? Oh, that's up here, outside the north gate of the city. Point number 3. Point number 4. We know that Jesus was crucified at Golgotha, and we know that Golgotha, the name, means the place of a skull. The hillside that I've got behind me, for 150 years at least, has looked like the face of a skull. You can see from this picture, which is just over 100 years old, the eye sockets, the bridge of the nose, and the features of the skull in that picture. Now, I've got 2 problems as I show you this photograph. The first is that the hillside doesn't look quite like this anymore. And the reason for that is that the rock that was between the eye sockets broke away in a very bad winter frost 7 years ago. It was there in the evening, it had gone in the morning. The part that we're looking at is over there. You can see the upside down V of what remains of the bridge of the nose. That's the first problem, that the hillside and the photograph don't look exactly the same. The second problem is that all of the photographs of this hillside from the time of Christ have been lost. 1 or 2 of you are still listening. So we have no idea what the hillside looked like 2,000 years ago. And for me to show you a photograph from 100 years ago and say this is conclusive evidence that this is Golgotha is about the flimsiest bit of evidence you could possibly have. And I hope you take no notice of it. But it may be Golgotha, the place of a skull, because here people's skulls were being crushed deliberately. Point 4. Point number 5. Point number 5. The Gospels tell us that close by the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden there was a tomb. Now you walk through a garden in order to get to this viewing point. There was a garden there in the time of Christ. It was a garden growing grapes, and we've got the archaeological evidence that proves that. And I'll show it to you before we go to see the tomb. You've been to the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm sure it was on your itinerary. They were growing olives. Garden means an agricultural field of some sort. They were growing olives there. They were growing grapes here. So 5 things that come together that indicate the possibility that this is the place of the crucifixion. How certain are we that we are at the exact spot? Well, the answer that we give to those who come is definitely maybe. We cannot be sure. There are 2 sites in Jerusalem that commemorate the crucifixion and the resurrection. One is here, the other one is here, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I think you've already been there?
You skipped it.
You skipped it. Did you pass by?
Even though we saw from a distance.
Yes.
That's okay, fine. It is 800 yards from here, 300 yards to the Damascus Gate, 500 yards on the other side, and you're there. This is the Antonia Fortress, where the Roman trial took place. Remember, Jesus had 2 trials. He was tried first of all by the Jewish authorities, and then handed over to the Roman government. And that took place here at the Antonia Fortress at the northern part of the Temple Mount. We're here, so either Jesus was brought here or he was taken there, which is the traditional site. No one has ever suggested to the east nor to the south because that was too far away. So what we say to people who come here to the garden is that today you are as close as you will ever be to the exact spot where Jesus was crucified. You are within 800 yards of the exact place. Now I know that you know that much more important than where is why. And I want just to think about that with you for a few minutes. If all that I do this afternoon with you is to show you a hillside and then we go somewhere else, I will have wasted your visit. Why was Jesus crucified? Now there is absolutely no debate about that because he told us in his own words. He said, I've not come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. Now we understand ransoms because they're still being paid in our own generation. Somebody is taken prisoner, captive, and they're not going to be released until money exchanges hands. Some sort of trade has to take place. When Jesus paid your ransom, and it's as personal as that, when he paid your ransom, it was not with money. If you recall, when he was crucified, the only possessions that he had were the clothes that he stood up in. And the soldiers played dice in order to see who got those. So Jesus had nothing to trade except one thing, and that was his life. So he didn't open a wallet for you, he opened his veins, and he gave his life for you. That was the trade. It was that individual and that personal, his life for your life. And he didn't do it because you have achieved such a level of goodness that he couldn't resist it. He did it because he loves you so deeply that he couldn't resist it. He didn't do it because you were worthy of that love. He did it because he is worthy of the praise and worship of eternity. He did it simply because of his love. And that's the amazing grace that we sing about in our hymns. There's one which I want you to see before we go to see the tomb. And it is a message that comes out of this hillside itself. Look and see how high it is. Before the time of Jesus, this was one continuous hill that ran all the way from there, right across to the walls of the city, 200 yards away. Thousands upon thousands of tons of rock had been excavated from here in order to build the city. By the time of Jesus, they had stopped taking any more stone out of the hillside. The reason? The stone that remains is very poor quality. So they went to other places in order to find the stone that they needed. Why is this important? It's important because if it is true that Jesus was crucified here, somewhere here, not on the top of the hill, they wouldn't have put him up there. They put a sign over his head that said Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. He wouldn't be able to read it up there. People were speaking to him and holding conversations as they went by on the road. There is no road up there, and never ever has been. If this is the location of Jesus' crucifixion, then this cliff was the curtain that hung behind his cross. It's important for this reason. There is a verse in Psalm 118, it's verse 22. Jesus picked up this verse and he applied it to himself. He said, this is speaking about me. And the verse, the stone that the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. When Jesus was condemned to death, it was for the crime of speaking rubbish. They accused him of blasphemy, and they said he deserves to die. The stone that was in this hillside was considered to be rubbish, and they rejected it. Jesus was considered to be rubbish, and they rejected him. 2,000 years later, Jesus is the central figure of the human race. That is an indisputable statement. 2.6 billion people name him as Lord and themselves as his disciple. I, my friend, am one of them, and glad to be. So let the hillside preach a little sermon to you. Take whatever photographs you would like. If you could move out of here, we've got another group that's going to come in immediately. So what will stand here?